Yes, Prof.
Yep. Great. Okay. Thank you. Well, the title I actually got was slightly different from this, which was called Mirror, Mirror on the Wall, Who's the Fairest of Them All? So I thought I'd better do some research on this. And this is a quote from a fairy tale, children's story called Snow White. And I do think it resonates actually with where we are and some of the problems with registry buy-in. So the story with this fairy tale is there was an evil queen, and every morning asked the magic mirror, who's the fairest in the land? And the mirror always replied, my queen, you are the fairest in the land. And the queen was pleased with this because the magic mirror never lies. So I think there's an analogy here between about 30 years ago when there were no registries, that we were dependent on our evidence from surgeons, champion surgeons who were heavily involved with industry quite frequently, presenting at large meetings, describing their views on what we should be doing and evidence. So what happened next, of course, in this fairy tale is that Snow White was a very beautiful person. And what happened is the queen asked the mirror, it responded, my queen, you're the fairest here, so true, but Snow White is 1,000 times more lovely, fair and beautiful than you. And the queen was very upset with this. And it resulted in the queen enlisting a huntsman to kill Snow White and bring her Snow White's lungs and liver. And so be it with registry technology, that when registries emerged, the mirror told a different story about what were the fairest in terms of implants and techniques, which challenged understanding. And the problem, to some respect, became the registry. So who's the fairest of them all? The registry, which is the best registry, the most accurate and validated. What are the best devices? Who are the best surgeons? Which are the best hospitals? Indeed, who are the best patients to operate on? I'm going to concentrate on devices. How can we really assess who what the best devices are? What criteria would we use? What methods would we use? At what time points? The best devices at 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? What adjustments should we make really with observational data? What about the minimum numbers for statistical analysis? What about center effects in surgeons and patients, of course? These are all complex issues. In relation to benchmarking, we have a number of benchmarking processes, including the NICE guidelines in the UK. In 2001, they recommended that joint replacement should have a survivorship of at least 90% or less than 10% revision. And they were updated in 2014 to 95%. So the benchmark changed as the results improved. Then we have the Orthopedic Data Evaluation Panel, which supplements this. And in registries, both in Australia and in the NGL, report on implants that have inferior or higher than anticipated revision rates. With device regulation, there's something called state of the art. So for both hip and knee replacements to be available on the market, particularly in Europe, they have to satisfy the criteria of state of the art. And then we have the International Society of Arthroplasty Registers developing a benchmarking committee. So what is benchmarking? Benchmarking is a measurement and comparison of device performance against agreed standards at specific time points. And to some extent, it answers the question, has the device reached an agreed standard of performance or indeed safety? So this is a printout from the Swiss registry, and they published these forest plots at 2 years. So you can see various device combinations and really concentrating on constructs, that is the femoral component and the acetabular component, with the numbers revised, numbers at risk, and the revision rates in 2 years, so you can see variation at 2 years. And in most annual reports, this is an abbreviated copy from the NGR, but they do this in Australia. Most registries list the implant constructs where the numbers are large enough. So you can see what the bearing is, the median age, percentage of males, and the revision rates at 1, 3, 5, 10 years and so on with confidence intervals. And you can see this for a whole variety of devices. So how can you benchmark something that's regarded as being acceptable or state of the art? I mean, what do we need to know? So the benchmark, as I've already said, with 95%, and the benchmark may improve as standards improve or change. So what's regarded as being unacceptable? As I've said, both in the NGR and Australia, we report on implants or devices that have higher than anticipated revision rates. And we do this by recording the revision rate twice that of the class mean with separation of confidence intervals. But why not benchmark to the best? So we can benchmark to other criteria. So we can say what is minimally acceptable, what is desirable, or can we benchmark from the best? So here we have Usain Bolt running 100 meters. I mean, how do we benchmark if you're a good runner? Well, to run in this race, the Olympic Games, you'd have to achieve the Olympic qualifying standard in any race. You can then look at the race average to decide whether the runners are any good. Or do you actually benchmark from the winner? Do you get the gold medal, or do you have the Olympic record? And in orthopedics, we can do the same thing. Look at the mean of the acceptable, and we can look at the best. And we can benchmark from each of these periods. So here's the concept of non-inferiority. And what this shows here is the benchmark shown in the vertical line. And then we have a delta, which is the degree of uncertainty around the benchmark. And this delta quite commonly is 20%. And a non-inferiority margin of 20% is routinely used in clinical trials. So there are three possible outcomes, and it's defined as the upper confidence interval from the device. So you can have a device benchmark, one that's inconclusive, where it crosses the delta, but it doesn't cross the benchmark, and one that is non-inferior. So it's as good as the benchmark, we're not sure whether it's as good at or it's worse, at a 20% margin. So there are two publications from the NGR, the Bristol group, one looking at hips and one looking at knees, and these are available in BMJ Open. And with these publications are also quite a lot of information with supplementary information. This describes benchmark at 3, 5, 7, and 10 years. The benchmark must have a minimum number of 1,000 at risk, and the benchmark is the device that has, or the construct that has the lowest revision rate at that period. And therefore the benchmark may differ between 3, 5, 7, and 10 years. All other implants to be in the analysis must have a minimum of 500 at risk at the benchmark time. I'm going to present just the two slides on hip and knee for the whole group. They're also stratified by gender and age group. And actually the metal on metal articulation was taken out of the analysis and include only ceramic on polyethylene and ceramic on metal. Inferiority was assessed at the standard margin of 20% and also at 100%. So here we have it, the results. Who's the mirror, mirror on the wall? Who's the fairest of them all? Well, the hips at 10 years, the hip construct that had the lowest revision rate was the metal on plastic bearing of an extra V40 with a Elite plus cemented socket, a Charnley socket. This combination had 3,500 procedures. Now the failure rate at 10 years was just over 2%. So going back to the NICE guidelines of 5% or less, this is quite significantly below that level. At that time, there were 26 comparators, 12 of which were inferior by 20%. And one concept that although the comparators still pass the NICE benchmark percent, i.e. failure rate's about 5%, the failure rate is 100% more than the best in class. And I would put it to you as orthopedic surgeons, we strive to do the best. And by just looking at a standard benchmark of 95%, we lose the ability to compare best in the group. So why wouldn't we want to use the best available? So for knees, this is the graph, sorry, for hips, and here we can see this graphically here, with the plots here. On the yellow line is the reference, the dotted line to the right is the 20% margin. So you see the benchmark and you see 5 or 6 different combinations combinations which are non-inferior, so they're as good as the benchmark. You see a group of implant combinations or constructs that are 20% worse, and there's one which is 100% worse. In relation to the cemented versus uncemented debate earlier, it's notable that all the implants that match the benchmark and not inferior are cement. Articulation was 20% worse. So for knees at 10 years, the benchmark, i.e. the best in class, was the PFC Sigma cemented unconstrained knee, nearly 20,000 procedures. The failure was 2.37%. Again, in comparison to the NICE guidelines of 5% failure, we're actually reducing the failure rate is about half of that standard. So again, we're looking at this niche of best in class. There were 27 comparators, 18 of which were inferior by 20% and 2 by 100%. And here we see the plots again, the forest plots, similar with the yellow line as being the reference, the dotted inferior by 20%, and the deep red further by 100%. So you can actually see there's quite significant differences of using different implants. So the point I'm really making, just to re-emphasize this, that we could be using an implant construct or device which has acceptable revision rates according to benchmark. But if the numbers are big enough, you can actually look at this to say, but what is best in class? Going back to that picture, good, but so was better. So non-inferiority benchmarking, the advantages are, if you benchmark the best, it doesn't depend on an arbitrary benchmark such as 5% failure, but it's based on what was the lowest revision rate. It's based on a large data set, can be stratified by age and gender, benchmarks the best rather than the average. The benchmark device and time can vary, so we can look at different benchmark periods, and different devices may have better performance at different periods. There are limitations with this approach, that many devices don't have enough numbers to be benchmarked. And this is because of the statistical reasons, because if you've got very few devices, the 95% confidence intervals will be so large, it's going to be inconclusive. It doesn't take into account residual confounding, which is inherent in registry data. And just by stratifying by age and gender doesn't take into account all the confounding or bias. It doesn't really assist innovation. So if a new innovation comes along, it can't ramp up the big numbers to comply with this sort of analysis. Therefore, another approach needs to be taken. It's dependent on revision as an outcome parameter for failure. And there have been big debates as to whether that's relevant or not, or whether we need to use supplementary outcome parameters. And of course, it's time dependent. And we heard from Tim Board that cemented implants may do better over 10 years, but there may be a crossover effect. So when we're looking at a benchmark at 10 years, it doesn't necessarily mean that these observations are going to continue beyond those points. So, it's like looking for what car, what hip. And I think this paper is about looking at the enhanced utility of registry data, not just to identify inferior devices or implant combinations, not just to identify the implants that are suitable to be used in relation to state of the art, but actually using registry data to look at best in class. And perhaps, as they say with Snow White, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? At 10 years,